Look, we are going to a state visit of President Trump to the UK. Their Jeremy Sicking has just concluded, and we're going to read from Rick Atkinson's wonderful The British Are Coming.
It's the first volume, and the second one has just come out.
And we actually on weekend edition, we were with Rick for the first. We were in
Yeah.
Lexington, if you recall. I think I have some coasters from there, if
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken. And it's just wonderful. And of course, it's a wonderful history. And at the moment, it brings up again the question of the effect of tariffs and taxes. So at this particular time, just before what we call the revolution, right, one if by land and two if by sea, and I on the opposite shore will be. Britain was the greatest colonial power in the world and greatly in debt.
Well, in part because it had been at war with the French and everyone else.
Particularly the French.
Yes, for centuries.
The Great War for the Empire had cost £100 million. Much of it borrowed, and the country was still strapped for money. There had been fearful of exaggerated whispers of national bankruptcy. But the British, yet now approaching £250 million, interest payments devoured roughly half of the £12 million collected in yearly tax revenue. Britons were already among Europe's most heavily taxed citizens, with ever larger excise fees on soap, salt, candles, paper, carriages, male servants, racehorses, all the stuff that we take for granted, darling, often 25% or more of an item's value. It seemed only fair that the colonists should help shoulder the burden. A typical American, by the Treasury Board calculations, paid no more than a sixpence a year in crown taxes. That's outrageous. I've always been
We
on
know
the other
what
side.
side he would
Yes,
have been
right,
on.
exactly. Compared to the average Englishman's 25 shillings, a ratio of 1 to 50, even as Americans benefited from the eradication of the French and Spanish threats, from the protection of trade by the Royal Navy, and from British regiments keeping peace along the Indian frontier at a cost that soon exceeded £400,000 a year. Yet things had gone badly. The Stamp Act, adopted in 1765, taxed paper in the colonies, from playing cards and pamphlets to wills, newspapers, and tax receipts. Americans reacted by terrorizing British revenue officers. Public servants. Stamp agents in the 13 colonies reportedly collected a total of £45, all of it in Georgia. Wonder why all of it in Georgia? And by boycotting imports so ferociously that some British factories closed, idling thousands. Repeal of the act in March 1766 triggered drunken revels from Boston to Savannah with fireworks, much bad celebratory verse. And in New York, the commissioning of a huge equestrian statue of George III, the best of kings, tricked up as Marcus Aurelius. English workers in places like Sheffield and Birmingham also cheered, but the best of kings had doubts. I'm going to sound like Jonathan Groff in Hamilton. I am more and more grieved at the accounts in America, he had grumbled in December 1765. Where this spirit will end is not to be said. 2 years later, the government tried again with the Townshend Acts, named for a witty, rambunctious Chancellor of the Exchequer known as Champagne Charlie. Import duties on lead, glass, paint, and other commodities provoked other violent American reaction, with British exports to the colonies plummeting by half. To maintain order in 1768, the government dispatched 4 regiments to fractious Boston. The 2 turned sour. In March of 1770, when skittish troops fired into a street mob, killing 5. 2 soldiers were convicted of manslaughter, their thumbs so branded, and their regiments discreetly decamped from town. That spring, Britain repealed all Townshend duties except for the trifling tax on tea, left intact to affirm parliamentary authority. An edgy calm returned to the colonies, but British moral and political authority had sloughed away bit by bit. Many Britons now viewed Americans as unruly, ungrateful children in need of caning. Has anything changed? Many Americans nurtured an inflated sense of their economic leverage and pined for the traditional policy of salutary neglect, which for generations had permitted self-sufficiency and autonomy, including governance through local councils and colonial assemblies that had long controlled fiscal matters. Colonists also resented British laws that prohibited them from making hats, woolen, cloth, and other goods that might compete with manufacturers in the mother country. Another, almost imperceptibly, a quarrel over taxes and filial duty metastasized into a struggle over sovereignty, with no elected delegates in Parliament. The Americans had adopted a phrase heard in Ireland for decades: no taxation without representation. George had never traveled beyond England, and in his long life had never would, not to Ireland, to the continent, not even to Scotland, and certainly not to America. Hold on. None of his ministers had been to the New World either. There was much they didn't know or understood imperfectly. The American population, now 2.5 million, was more than doubling every quarter century, an explosive growth unseen in recorded European history, and fourfold England's rate. The 2/3 of white colonial men owned land compared to 1/5 in England. The 2/3 were literate, more than in England. That in most colonies, 2/3 could vote, compared to one Englishman in 6.
I found this section fascinating.
It is fascinating. I didn't know that.
No.
Huh.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
All right. That provincial America glowed with enlightenment aspirations, so that in a city like Philadelphia, now rivaled Edinburgh for medical education, and boasted almost as many booksellers, 77, as England's top provincial towns combined. Also, that eradication of those French and Spanish threats had liberated Americans from the need for British muscle, that America now made almost 15% of the world's crude iron, foreshadowing an industrial strength that would someday dwarf Britain's. That if lacking ships like the Bellefleur, Americans were fearless seafarers and masters of windship construction with the intimate knowledge of every inlet, estuary, one of my favorite words, it's a great one, estuary, and shoal, from Nova Scotia to Barbados, that nearly 1,000 American vessels traded in Britain alone. And that unlike the Irish and other subjugated peoples, the Americans were heavily armed. Not only were they nimble with firelocks, which were as common as kettles, they also deployed a robust militia, experienced in combat against Europeans, Indians, and insurrectionist slaves. Sensing its own ignorance, the government had drafted a rudimentary questionnaire that would soon be sent to colonial governors. The 22 questions range from number 3, what is the size and extent of the province, the number of acres supposed to be contained therein, and number 4, what rivers are there? And number 10, what methods are used to prevent illegal trade and are the same ineffectual? And number 21, what are the ordinary and extraordinary experiences of your government? No doubt some helpful answers would emerge. And now this is something to consider when we talk about the revolution. Roughly 250,000 Americans would serve the cause in some military capacity. At least 1 in 10 of them would die for that cause. 25,674 deaths by one tally. As many as 35,800 by another. Those deaths were divided with rough parity among battle, disease, and British prisons. A larger proportion of the American population to perish in any conflict other than the Civil War. that many considered the war providential, ordained by God's will and shaped by divine grace, certainly the outcome would also be determined by gutful soldiering, endurance, hard decisions, good and bad, and luck. Good and bad.
Which
just
was right.
David
Exactly.
McCullough was talking about, or John Meacham and David McCullough's
daughter,
Dory McCullough Lawson,
in that wonderful book that just came out.
Mm-hmm.
History Matters.
From which we read the other night. Yes, luck matters. The odds were heavily stacked against the Americans. No colonial rebellion had ever succeeded in casting off imperial shackles. But as Voltaire had observed, history is filled with the sound.
I love this quote.
Oh, God. Did you know this quote before?
Yes, read it from the full again.
But as Voltaire had once observed, history is filled with the sound of silken slippers going downstairs and wooden shoes coming up.
Voltaire was a very wise person.
Yeah. Yes, of course they would need a Frenchman to be able to summarize it properly. This would not be a war between regimes or dynasties, fought for territory or the usual commercial advantages. Instead, what became known as the American Revolution was an improvised struggle between two peoples of common heritage, now sundered by divergent values and conflicting visions of a world to come. Unlike most European wars of the 18th century, this one would not be fought by professional armies on flat, open terrain, with reasonable roads and daylight and good weather. No, it was fought in the age of reason, infused with Enlightenment ideals. This war, the Civil War, would spiral into savagery, with sanguinary cruelty, casual killing, and atrocity. Those 3,059 hard days would yield two tectonic results. The first was in the United Kingdom, where the reduction of the empire by about 1/3, including the demolition of the new dominion in North America, proved to be as divisive as any misfortune. See, I'm getting carried away.
Emotional.
Proved to be as divisive as any misfortune to befall the nation in the 18th century, at a cost of £128 million and thousands of British lives. The broader conflict began in 1778 with the intervention of European powers on America's behalf, led to the only British defeat in the 7 Anglo-French wars fought between 1689 and 1850.
The French did pay a heavy price for this, but it felt so good.
Oh my gosh, darling.
Sorry.
Please try and be understanding.
To help the Americans in their revolution.
Yeah, that's what you meant. That's what you meant, yes, right. Oh my. Let me see.
Next paragraph.
Next paragraph, yeah. Of course, what was lost by force of arms could be regained, and a second British Empire, in different garb, would flourish in the next country. Would flourish in the next century. The second consequence was epical and enduring. The creation of the American Republic. Surely among mankind's most remarkable achievements, this majestic construct also inspired a creation myth that sometimes resembles a garish cartoon, a melodramatic tale of doughty yeomen resisting moronic, brutal lobsterbacks. Lobsterbacks was a nickname for the British soldiers because of the red coats. Lobsterbacks.
I thought it's because they spend a lot of time in Boston eating lobster.
That's why the name stuck, okay? Roy, add me another one over here. Can't afford them back home. Sorry, I digress. The Civil War that unspooled over those 8 years would be both grander and more nuanced, a tale of heroes and knaves, of sacrifice and blunder, of redemption and profound suffering. Beyond the battlefield, then and forever, stood a shining city on a hill.
Isn't that wonderful?
It's just
book is
beautifully.
wonderful.
It's just Rick Atkinson. The British are coming.
Volume 1. Volume
Right.
2 has just come out.
And we had a little something on it on Weekend Edition. So thanks very much. Oh, thank you. Also, Elise, nice of you to say that. She says best history reading now. So thanks very much for being with us tonight on our open book. We'll see you tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye. Barry Buckland just joined. Barry, catch it up from the first. Thank you, Dorothy.